So hello again, welcome and welcome to the Silver Tent TV. And this is our group, and we're going to be talking about what's your funeral. So having those choices, maybe some choices maybe that some of us aren't familiar with around different types of funeral. Choices, maybe some choices. Did you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's stopped. Anyway, we'll see. So, before we go any further, can I introduce the panel members? And if Deborah, would you like to say who you are and where you are and what you enjoy doing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Deborah Sophia Magdalene, the Frequency Alchemist. I help people to be the best versions of themselves, to raise the frequency and raise the game. Because when we raise our vibration, we attract so much more in life that we want to do. I work with frequency technology, I work with essential oils, and I run a house and pet sitting business called Hugs House and Pet Sitting Service, which I've done for the last 6 years. And I absolutely love living a nomadic lifestyle. I've lived this lifestyle now for 12 years, and I just love traveling and being in nature and hanging out with people. That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. How about you, Caroline?
Well, like Deborah, I'm a house and pet sitter, so we're both nomads, but I am way more virgin than she is. I've only been doing this for 2.5 years and absolutely love it. I unashamedly position myself as a house sitter for high net worth families so that I get to live in the most beautiful places. In my other life, I'm a cognitive behavioral hypnotherapist and a mindset trainer. I came to that quite late. I'm 62 and I did a massive, great big life swerve when I was 50 and went back to college to train as a therapist. But realized quite quickly that actually spending all my time with severely depressed and anxious and traumatized people, there are others who are much better at that than I am. And what I really was excited by was what people were able to do and who they were able to be once they got their energy back, once they'd fixed, you know, the stuff that they came to see me for. And I segued into kind of, well, I call it mindset training because I train people in a process in how to think in a healthy and flexible way. But I guess most people would call me a mindset coach and a speaker. So that is me. And wild beach walks is my thing. And I love looking after the animals when I'm here and being out in nature. And I'm a relatively new active person in Silver Synergy and the Silver Tent. I love the community here. Yeah. So that's me.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, my name's Sunday, and if you don't know what I do, I am an estranged parent coach. I sort of fell into this slightly by accident. It definitely wasn't something that was on my to-do list as a mum that has been left out of her adult children's life, and I have a community on Facebook who I serve. And it sort of fills my heart to be able to support parents who've been cut out of their children's lives, helping them move through the grief, learn some new communication skills, and also to help people to get in touch with their creativity. What are they going to do whilst their children are off doing their own thing? Because very often as women, I think we find that we've really identified with being a parent, being a mom, and to lose those roles is quite a shock for many. So that is my work, that is my service. It feels very privileged to be able to serve that community. It's not something that you come across on a day-to-day basis, really. And my joy is getting out on my bike and foraging in hedge bottoms in Yorkshire. That sounds rather strange, doesn't it? But finding wild things to eat and put into infusions. And I've actually got something here that is, you can see with this backdrop. No, you can't. There's an invisible glass, look. In there's a bit of meadowsweet, a bit of late meadowsweet, and I've had that in the fridge, and I like experimenting with things that I know. So I make sure that I know what these hedge bottom tree foraged ingredients, and I know a little bit more than perhaps I might have done 5 or 10 years ago. So that's me. And at this point, I just want to acknowledge that we would have had a fourth panel member, and she may arrive, and if she does, we'll just let her in and include her in the conversation. And so welcome again. And I think for me, I'd love to kick us off with this first question. We've got a few questions just to get the conversation rolling. And this first one is, what drew you to this conversation? What attracted you to say yes to being a panel member here today? And I can talk about why I thought it might be a good idea to talk about it. But if you would like to kick us off, what drew you here?
Okay, well, I remember seeing you post in the group, and I think you'd phrased it about unusual funerals, or what type of different funerals are there. And what drew me was when I was in Peru, it was in 2014. I was living in like a mud brick house up a mountain on a coffee plantation, and nursing a lady who was coming to end of life. I'd gone there with her daughter, who was a doctor, and it was like a really, really interesting experience doing this in a different country and then comparing it with how we have a very, very different attitude to death here. So it's that drew me to this conversation, because over there, when you die, it's a celebration of life, and it was completely different. And I'll always treasure that experience. You can't buy experiences like that, and it is something that will stay with me forever. And I, like being in the Silver Tent, we've had Silver Sisters that have passed over. We've got family members that have passed over, and I think coming to end of life is such an important topic to plan when you're actually younger. So it's that drew me to this conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah. How about you, Caroline?
Well, for me, there was a post in the Silver Tent that was a discussion. I can't remember exactly what it was about, but it's something that's been very front of mind for me because my parents are in their mid to late 80s, and it's a conversation that I'm having with them right now. And it's a conversation that my father has not wanted to have. He will not discuss anything to do with, the next part of his life and the end of his life. And my dad kind of, when he retired from the Foreign Office, he read a statistic. This is when retirement age was 60, and he read a statistic that most Foreign Office retirees die within 18 months. So he was kind of holding his breath for about 5 years, just waiting to die. And then when he got to 65 and he was still alive, it was like, oh, I better live then. But I've been trying to have the conversation with them, and he was incredibly resistant to it. Mm-hmm. And I've approached it in a different way now, because I realized that I've lost my fear of end of life, and I'm really interested now in how we honor it and how we prepare for it and how it's part of life. So it all came at the right time for me. It came at a time when I'm thinking about it anyway. I'm trying to guide and help others to reflect on their end of life. So when Sunday, when you said, why don't we do this? I thought, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, because it's not, in my experience, it's not something that people have openly talked about, even though I'm from a particular farming background, death was all around us. We never talked about human death really. And so what inspired me to say, how about this? Let's talk about this was, I'm curious about this. I'm also curious about my approach to it. There's some days where I'm really scared about what's next, and then there's others days where I think, yes, it is the next adventure. And I think it was a Harry Potter lady, can't remember her name, who said death, but to the enlightened, death is the next adventure. And also the learning around soul work, and I'm not sure what's next, but there is something for me, I think, around the fact that I would like to honor. I get the sense that we leave our bodies, and I like the idea of honoring this vessel that I've lived in, to have it wrapped in some sort of ceremonial shroud and to be taken or into some space where it feels very sacred. You know, I'm interested in the sacredness of it. And in a couple of weeks' time, I'm doing another call like this, which is around rituals and ceremonies, which sort of ties in with this, you know. And I watched, I mean, both my parents have died, and my dad had a very traditional, well, I say traditional, but it was unusual in that he came home and he laid in state, as I like to think of it, in the room that he'd spent most of his life in, the front room at the farm. And it was interesting how it went cold in there, and decorations appeared from people who came to visit him, you know. And also, I don't know much about what a wake is. You know, I don't know much about the old, you know, just recently I went to a witch revival weekend in Lancaster, and there was a Scottish woman there who talks about the Culross witches and how in Scotland there's certain things, you know, people would be laid out on the kitchen table and you couldn't drink, you had to throw the milk away, and there were certain things like that. And I don't know any of this, you know. It's all so been hidden away, funerals, death, the whole thing around end of life. And so as a Silver Sister and somebody who's interested in talking about things that people don't often talk about, I thought this would be a lovely topic to talk about, to bring it out into the open, for us to share and explore what our experiences and what we've come across in terms of funerals, and what we know about, what we've seen maybe on YouTube channels or whatever, because it pops up everywhere. I find once you have an interest in something, it seems like algorithms throw it your way, and you think, I'm not quite ready for my own yet, but I'd like to see the information. So yes. And another question, I suppose we can lead nicely into, like, if you know, what kind of funeral would you want for yourself?
Well, for me, it's I don't want to be buried. I'd rather be cremated. And then I'd like my ashes taken to maybe the top of Pendle Hill and scattered up there, because I absolutely love Pendle Hill. And it's always been very, very close to my heart. Or to have like a memorial tree. And just to be remembered that way. And you know, I've always said to my children, you know, like, death isn't the end. And it really doesn't matter where our bodies were. I don't want people going to a grave and like remembering me in that way. I'd rather them be out in nature and connect with the trees and remember me that way. So for me, it's about doing that, but also having like some sort of a ceremony. I've been thinking about music and what music would I like. And one of my funeral songs that I've chosen is Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd, because I used to be a biker and I was really, really good at doing the biker dance to that. And I always used to joke with my sisters and say, I'm going to teach you this dance, and when I die, you've all to do it around my coffin. Give me a good send off. So I'd like to have like a celebration of leaving this physical suit and being on my next adventure. And I don't have any fear of death whatsoever. In fact, when I was in the Amazon rainforest and working with the plant medicines there, in one of the ceremonies, I asked to be shown what it's like to die and to have a life review, and that was life-changing. And I just felt myself merge with the whole universe, and it was like, oh God, this was absolute bliss, and I could have just stayed there. It was beautiful, and it's something that will always stay with me.
Oh, thank you, Deborah.
That's lovely.
Yeah, you reminded me. I just want to remind myself of the, that I wonder, you know, like with the plant medicine, the right left hemisphere thing. I don't know if either of you have come across the Jill Bolte Taylor video.
Yeah, Dying to Be Me.
She actually had a stroke and she was a neuroscientist and she actually observed herself having a stroke, and I think it was the left hemisphere that closed down. Go on, Deborah.
Yeah, it wasn't Dying to Be Me. That was Anita Majani. It was A Stroke of Insight.
That's the one.
Right.
Yeah, brilliant book.
Her right brain, in fact, she's done a YouTube TED talk, and her right brain came on and she said exactly what you said, that she merged with everything. And I think maybe we get to those merging things where we realize we are just all part of everything. Some of us, I don't know, I've only had 1 or 2 occasions, and they're quite profound. But yeah, so thank you for reminding me about Jill Bolte Taylor. If you want to have a look at that, I think that's a really good insight. It was called A Stroke of Insight. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant
Oh,
book.
I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah.
The way I think about it has changed a bit, in that funerals are for the living. You know, that when I think about it, I think about physics and energy, and how energy transmutes and changes, but it never begins and it never ends. So the energy that created us, the act of, you know, procreation that created us, and the energy that we live with, that passes through us, that keeps us alive, when we die and that we take that final breath and our brain stems cease to function, it's only physical. You know, it's only the envelope that ceases to function. The energy goes elsewhere. And I think that, for me, explains why we are at one with everything. And actually, we're at one with everything anyway, but it's just that we get so caught up in this envelope and what it's going through and what's around it, that we lose sight of that external, the fact that, you know, we are part of everything. And it's only when we have those experiences, whether it's, you know, plant assisted, or whether it's some sort of mental breakdown frees us to do it, or whatever it is. I've heard numerous people talk to me about how they felt that they knew everything and they were part of everything and there was nothing to fear. And so I've had that experience from other people often enough to no longer be afraid of it, and to know that when my energy leaves this body, it will go on to something else. It will become part of everything else. And this is just the envelope that it was living in for a while. And so my body doesn't need me to do anything with it when I die. It's the people who are left behind who need the ritual, who need the sacrament, who need to say goodbye, you know, in some way. So I've left my body at the moment to science. So I wanted to be a medical, you know, assistant. I wanted medical students to learn on me. And that's what's in my will, and I'm slightly changing my mind on that. I'm not married and I don't have children. So I don't know how important it is for the people who I'm leaving behind, my family and friends, that they have something to say goodbye to. I don't know. So at the moment, I'm still leaving myself to science, but I'm also really a little bit in love with the idea of becoming a tree. You know, a friend of mine who lost her husband, the love of her life, who she met when she was 60, and they had 5 amazing years together, and then he became ill. He's part of a bluebell wood, and his funeral was completely unorthodox, and he arrived in a box that was zebra painted because he was in love with an African adventure he'd had when he was young. And the whole thing just was so full of smiles, and he is now part of the bluebell wood. And there's something about the romance of that is really appealing as well. So I haven't made my final decision yet, but it's not for me. You know, I'll have done with this. And when a cousin of mine died far too young a few years ago, and his sister and brother had to go and identify him, he died alone of a heart attack, and they had to go and identify him. And his sister just said, "That's not him. He's not there anymore. You know, he's not there anymore. It's okay." And it was just this really profound sense of the fact that he'd left, and whatever was his remains weren't him. They were just the envelope that he inhabited while he was on this planet. So that's kind of where I know I haven't really answered the question properly, but I'm still in two minds as to whether I go to medical students to help them learn, or I become part of a Blue Bell Wood.
Can I just come
Either
in
way.
there? Because my mum died 5-6 years ago, and she donated her body to medical science. And the reason that she did that was that when my niece was a baby, she needed a liver transplant. And that was my mum's way of saying thank you, because the doctors do need bodies to practice on.
Yes, they do.
But for us, it was really, really hard. Because it prolongs the grieving process.
Yes.
I found it really challenging, because although you know that that's not your mum, like we had these horrible visions of her lying on a table and being cut up. You know, like the imagination takes over, and it was really, really challenging.
How long ago was that?
5-6 years ago.
Okay. Were you given? Because I know often that after 2 or 3 years, when you've helped the students to learn, they have a ceremony and they cremate the remains and they send them back to the family. Did you get that?
They were very, very honouring. It was actually Liverpool University who got the body. And we went to a ceremony at Liverpool, and it was the students who were saying thank you to the families. And explaining how they called them their patients, which I thought was really beautiful. But explaining how, you know, like the process and that they have the same patient for the duration of their journey. And then after, I think it was 13 months, we had a funeral for Mum. It was just the immediate family, me, my 4 sisters, my dad, and partners. And it was at a church, well, at a ceremony was at a little graveyard actually in the Liverpool area, and the university pay for like the coffin, a basic one. They pay for the funeral as a thank you for the body donation. And so my mum and dad used to joke about, we've got the free of charge funeral plan. Why pay for a funeral? We've got the free of charge funeral plan. But in fact, you still do need to pay for the body to be in storage with the undertaker whilst the university comes and picks you up. And so we couldn't really grieve for Mum properly until we'd had that closure of the funeral. And now we need to go through it all again when Dad finally pops his clogs, you know, because he's doing the same. And we're thinking, oh, please, Dad, do you really want to do this? And he said, well, me and your mum had a pact, and she's gone through it. So, I need to go through it. So I thought, fair enough. It's their wishes. It's their funeral.
Yeah. I think if I had children, I think I might think differently about it. So one of the reasons I made that decision is because I've got 2 brothers who I don't see a great deal of. So it's, it's up to me, really. I don't think they're going to be too bothered either way. But I really, I've really taken that on board, and I really understand that it must have been really hard for you. Do you think you have changed your view in the last 6 years since she passed away? Do you think that you might find it different with your dad?
Well, we've already been through it once, so I think it would be easier the second time. We had a funeral for Mum, but without the body. So we had a church service and invited people and had a ceremony for her, and then like refreshments afterwards.
Celebration of her life.
But it was really weird, like not having the coffin there.
Remains,
very, very weird. But you do need a backup plan as well, because it's not guaranteed that they can.
That's right.
It depends on what time of year it is. It depends on if they've got any availability in the morgue. It depends on what the reason of death is as well, because
and the condition of your body. No,
they do need a backup plan.
Thank you, ladies. Very rich conversation around medical things. My choice, I like you, Caroline, I haven't decided. I think perhaps you don't for quite some time, but I've explored my ideal would be just sitting down at the bottom of a tree and checking out there like animals
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that's allowed these days.
You can do it in the States. You can do it in America.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's something for me about there's one place left in on top of my mum and dad. You know, there's a coffin in the churchyard in the village that I grew up in, and I've sort of expressed to my siblings that I might like to go in there because I want to be buried. And the reason why I want to be buried is because as a child, I used to watch things on the farm, and I used to be fascinated by how things that were dead in the fields, if they'd been there for some time, the grass, you were talking about energy, the grass was absolutely vivid green. And that, of course, when I was little, I didn't really understand that. But now as I've got older, the actual energy of the body,
yeah, they were fed,
was feeding the grass. So
yeah,
I would like to go into the ground. Sounds a bit scary. But also there's that thing, you know, the image that I had that I put on, that image and that little bit of article that inspired this in me was that article of those 6 people carrying at hip height somebody who was very lightly, not in a coffin, just laid on what looked like boards with shrouds around. And it sort of inspires me, you know. I think for me, I think we perhaps have this fixed notion of what it's got to be like. And I think when people start to poke around, the things that we perhaps feel aren't available or even legal, we find that actually it is available if there's enough energy pushed. And I've seen some fantastic sort of alternative types of funerals, some of them partly traditional, and then having this wacky part that actually is what the person who was leaving their body wanted for their funeral. And I do get a sense, you know, that in some ways this honoring of this body, I get really in tune with my body at the moment, probably because sometimes it's poorly, you know, or it aches, and as we get older, it's sort of tuned in my gratitude towards this thing that I chose to incarnate into, and how sometimes brutal I've been towards it. Francesca and I joke, once I said I use my body like a hammer in life, and she said I've used mine like a cushion, you know. And I'm just thinking those different ways that we've used our bodies. And so for me, it's about honoring this vessel and giving it back to the land in some way. I know probably putting it into a coffin isn't, and putting it into a coffin and into the ground and on top of my mum and dad, there's some sort of romantic part of me, isn't there? Obviously, mixing my remains with my mum and dad sounds quite, it might sound strange, but for me, actually, they are the people that their bodies were the people that I came through. So it sort of feels sort of comforting in a way. And I'm the youngest, so I don't know if that plays a part. But I also recently was inspired by a comedian, and for the life of me, I can't remember her name. You might have seen, she did a TED talk, and she was talking about how she was dying. She'd got lung cancer. She's a very well-known American comedian. And she was doing this TED talk saying she was dying. She got lung cancer, and she went, "Ah, poor me. Yes, I know." And then she explained that she'd had a voracious appetite for life. She'd had her fill, and she wanted to be buried because she said, and all the detritus and all the things that will eat me, I think they'll have a banquet, she said. And I mean, it freaks you out thinking of being eaten, but then, you know, we're so sanitized, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it's
an issue. You know, there are lots and lots and lots of us on this planet, and we're big, lumpy, you know, wet creatures. We have to find ways to deal with us, as well as, you know, offering our people an opportunity to grieve. There is a real practical issue. And I was listening to something on the radio about a new process, which kind of, I think it uses something like lime, and you place the body in it and overnight, and it reduces it to bones, to the clean calcium of bones. And that is easy and non-toxic to spread, and to because, you know, it's energy heavy cremation. I have an issue with fire. I think I'm scared of fire. And I know the thing is that I know I won't be here. I won't be here. But there's something about fire that still bothers me. I haven't quite come to terms with fire, but it's really polluting. And I know that they have much cleaner, crematoria now, but it's really polluting. So I'm quite fascinated by new ways. I also came across a cryo way, a freezing way, where they freeze dry you, and then you become powder, and you basically go and fertilize a field or a tree or whatever it is. And I quite like that idea as well. I don't mind the idea of being frozen, but it's I won't be here. I won't be here.
You'd be watching though, maybe.
Yeah, I might be watching, and I might be amused by it. I'll be in the trees and the water and the cold, the ice that's freezing me.
Because somebody said, like, just sorry, I'm butting in, but the thing that somebody said, they, like you were talking about a living funeral, like have your party before you go. And comedian said, it's a shame to be dead and hear all these lovely things said about me. Can you all say before I go?
While I'm alive.
I think it was you, Deborah, that talked about that. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, my dad, like he's had 2 practice wakes, we've called them the Last Supper. We've all had a meal together as a rehearsal for the real thing. And champagne and toast, and then we get my dad to do a speech. It's been wonderful.
Oh my goodness!
We have really black humour, and we can easily talk about it, and it's good, because it opens a subject up which in a lot of households is taboo. But when you bring humour to it, it changes the whole energy.
I think that's fantastic. Well, my dad, is the opposite end of the spectrum, and he wouldn't acknowledge at all that he was going to die. And, there was a real terror there. And the way I've approached that is over the last probably 18 months, 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, since I've spent more time with them during COVID, which has been such a blessing. I just talk about it quite often and really normally. And it's starting to work, it's starting to normalize the conversation. I talk about mine. And what I've suggested is that as a family, my 2 brothers and I, and my mum and dad, we fill in a spreadsheet of our wishes. How would where would we like to be put? How would we like to go? And what would we like to our celebrations? I don't use the word funeral. What would we like our celebration of life to be? And mine's going to be a humanist. Dad, we'll have some Church of Scotland thing. Mum's will be Catholic. I don't know. My brothers haven't filled it in yet. But just so, and the way I've pitched it is that all of us, once we've filled in this thing, then we all know what each other's wishes are. We don't have to think about it anymore. We can just get on with enjoying ourselves and loving life, because the time to be making those decisions is not when somebody's passed away. That's too distressing, and having to work out and think about what somebody might want. So I just said, why don't we just all do this? I'd quite like to have We're Off to See the Wizard at the end of my celebration, and I'm just trying to normalize the conversation by regularly revisiting it in a really matter-of-fact way. And with my dad, I've taken out some of the terminology that funeral, dying, things like that. I've slightly sanitized that, I suppose. I don't know if sanitize is the right word, but I've lightened it up. I don't use those words necessarily. I talk about celebration of life, and I talk about end of life rather than death, because I think it's just the end of this part. And it is starting to work. He is starting to feel more comfortable. He doesn't leave the room when I start talking about it anymore. So we are getting there. We're halfway through our spreadsheet, which I'm relieved about.
That's really good. And what you were saying before, Sunday, about there's different ways that you can do things. I remember looking on YouTube years ago at DIY funerals, because you don't have to go through the traditional routes. You don't have to appoint an undertaker. If somebody's in the mortuary in the hospital, you can go up there, you can take a sheet and put them in the back of your car and take them somewhere. And if you've got like a farmer who has like a plot of land where people can be buried, well, you can actually, this woman actually dug the grave herself, and her mum was wrapped in a shroud, and she was filming it like as she was going along, and she created a YouTube video about how you can do it yourself. And I think when you're doing it that way, it's showing so much love and honor for that person, because I think as a society, death is too clinical in the UK. You know, when I was in South America, and Rosa died, you know, I was there when she passed over, and a daughter, being a doctor, was trying to resuscitate her as she's dying. And I just said, it's her time. It's her time to go. You know, we have to appreciate that death is a part of life, and it happens to all of us. And I think in the medical profession, they don't allow people to go naturally. And this is why it's so important that we do our own plans and people know what our wishes are.
Oh, my dad begged us. He was 91. He was in the hospital. He begged us to take him home. And the nurses really struggled to let us go. He said, we can't put him on a drip or anything. But we took him home, and he died in his front room. And I remember they had end of life people coming in, and I was crying just outside the room. And this, she said, why are you crying? And I said, because my dad's dying. And she said, you know what? He's doing his last job on earth, and he's doing it really well. And that was so comforting, because he wasn't strapped up to anything. He wasn't having any medication. He was just easing his way out. And it was very different to my mum's death, because she struggled and fought to hang on. And so there is something, you're right, Deborah, you know, it's about, there's some posts that go around on Facebook that when somebody dies, there's nothing to be done in those first few minutes after. They just sit with the body and be, because we just sort of rush into panic mode. We want to not have death. We don't want things to die, but yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, the thing is, it takes like a soul time to transition. So when they take that last breath, they're still there, they're still in that transitioning phase. And the last thing you want is like calling somebody in those precious moments. You know, you want at least a few hours before you call anybody in.
Yeah.
I think the living were very close to the veil at that time, and allowing the person to die gently and allowing ourselves to witness them dying gently. We're kind of, you know, we're on either side of a very transparent veil. And I think it's a special time that we need to honor. And you're absolutely right. You know, it shouldn't be a violent process. My mother has a DNR, a do not resuscitate notice. And my father was furious when he found out. And because she goes into hospital quite regularly, and he wanted everything done to save her. And she said, the thing is that if you have to be resuscitated, it means you've died. And this is an 86-year-old body, and I don't want that kind of violence done to it if I've died. And he is gradually coming round to the idea. You know, he's still terrified of his life ending, but I think he's gradually coming round to the idea that when it's time, it's time. And personally, I don't want to have that violence done to him or to my mother. I want them to be able to have that peaceful ending, and for us as their children to be able to witness that peaceful ending and to go through it with them, and to be, you know, to be on the other side of the veil with them. Because those few hours, they're very brief, they won't last. So I think we need to be honored, to be present for them and to honor them. And an awful lot of people don't get that.
I think the other point to plan for your own funeral is, who do you want to be around your bedside when you're dying?
Yeah.
And how do you want it to be? Do you want music? Do you want silence? Do you want prayers? You know, what do you want to happen? Do you just want people there to hold that space for you in silence? Because I think silence is is important. That's what I would want, because like your senses will be heightened, be very acute. And if there's a lot going on in the room, that can hold you, I think, to the earthly plane. And, you know, you hear stories of people saying, it's all right, Mum, you can go now, and giving permission for them to pass on and reassuring the person who's dying that everything's okay and they can let go and be on the journey. Otherwise it can, we can hold them in this plane otherwise.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's some really soft shares there. Thank you, Caroline, for your tenderness there. And I, you know, just talking about the funerals and coming back to what you were saying, Caroline, about it being for the people that are left behind. And the personality, you know, like it in a way, you know, it could be fun. I get it, Deborah, that you were having fun with your dad. And it doesn't work like that for everybody. And I suppose for me, I would love to have fun planning my funeral. My children are absent in my life at the moment, so I'm not quite sure how that's all going to play out, but I'm planning on being here for another 30 years. So there's plenty of time. And, you know, thinking about the funeral and thinking about those songs and the things that I would like, but then it's a joint decision, you know, it's like planning a wedding or a, you know, or planning your having your birth plan, you know, for your baby coming through. It's a similar thing. And I know that there's people in the tent, Synergy Sisters, who are, if they're not already, there's people, death doulas, and we have Jane Duncan Rogers, who I think you've got the book, Deborah, there, that she's got this before I
go. Yeah.
Which I think, you know, if somebody is wanting to at least explore, I'm sure she's got lots of information on her website around those conversations, how to have them with your family, I got a box, I did some work with her, and I've got a box which was supposed to have some of my plans in it, but it's still sort of empty, but at least I've got the box. We've got some comments coming through, which Steffi's very kindly popping in, and if I could just sort of reflect these to you and just see if they inspire us a little bit more. So Steffi herself has put, as far as I'm aware, leaving a body to medical science these days is quite a complex process, and as much as they need it, they're extremely picky. This has the potential to add to the trauma for those left behind. Thank you for that comment, Steffi. And then Gwen Atkinson, I think it's so important to share our wishes with those we wish to carry them out and to discuss them with them to ensure they are happy with that and can manage it. Yeah, there's some sort of like, is it what they want to do? These conversations are so important to have with our loved ones long beforehand. And then from Catherine, my mother had organised hers with older brother and sister who had lasting power of attorney. It was fairly traditional service and cremation, but many times when I was looking after her, she commented how she would love to be buried under a tree. So I scattered half her ashes under trees above where she had lived here. She was pleased, I know. Yeah, thank you for that, Catherine. And then a last one from Gwen, planning and sharing our end-of-life wishes is so important, not just our funerals, but what we want as we come to the end of our days, how we want to pass. And it's strange because maybe we don't know until those final, you know, oh, sorry, I've changed my mind, you know, I'd like it. I'd like some music, or I'd like silence, or.
And so, I think Catherine makes a really important point there, is that, you know, we don't know how we're going to go or when or where we're going to go. It was talking about her father died in the shower at a squash club. We have no idea. I had a friend of a friend who died at the dentist, had a bad reaction to the anesthetic. So, you know, a lot of it's going to be taken out of our hands. And it is incredibly important that our wishes are known and that they are somewhere where people can access them easily and quickly, so that, you know, we can be treated with dignity, so that people aren't scrabbling around trying to work out what to do with us and embalming us when we don't want to be, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's a great reminder that we have no idea. We have no idea how we're going to go and when we're going to go. We just
That's
have to
so
make it
true.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
we
was
have to make it
talking to
easy
my
for everyone
son.
else.
I was talking to, sorry, I interrupted you then, but I was talking to my
Yeah.
son this week about that, you know, and I said, you're never too young to start planning, especially when you got children and, you know, a family. And if you've got blended families, even more important.
You
And
just want to explain what a blended family is in case some people don't know.
yeah, it's where you've been married before or different partners and you've got children from previous relationships, and you know your partner might have previous children, and so it's a blended family. And the other thing that I would say is I read an amazing book years and years ago, and it's called Your Legacy of Love by Gemini Adams. And Gemini got a Winston Churchill grant to study death and the dying and those that were left behind. And she interviewed many, many people, those that were dying and those that had been left. Those that were left, she asked them a question: would you rather have a legacy of like the house and the money, or would you rather have like something that person really wanted you to have, and with like a letter expressing how much they loved you? And that was what people wanted. They wanted some like a really heartfelt letter expressing the love. And so when we're thinking about our own funeral, it's about what can we create as our legacy for those people that we're leaving behind, that will help that grief process be even easier. So like with this in mind, with my parents, I started to create a series of interviews, you know, with them at different times of their life, and have created like DVDs, so that we've got that as a memory of them, you know, like talking about their life and what advice would they give and things like that.
What a
And
lovely idea.
yeah, and you know, I really love this book because it really makes you think about, you know, what is it that, how can you keep those memories alive, and what can you do to, you know, for those people that you're leaving.
In this digital age, I can imagine that there's quite a lot that people will be leaving that will be accessible for people to watch. And because my dad was a singer, and I managed, I don't know where it's gone, and my mum recorded lots of video cine films, so there's some visual memories of Dad and him singing. And in terms of my own legacy, you know, friend recently, both her parents have died, and her mum had really put together an absolute amazing box of information and instructions, and had left this friend of mine a beautiful letter that just, you know, to receive that from your mother, especially if you've had a bit of a wobbly time, which I would reckon that every child has had a wobbly time with their parent at some point, to receive that would be just wonderful. Yeah. So yeah, I think sort of having a memory box that you're leaving behind would a box of delights.
I remember when I was in Glastonbury and I was looking after a lady who was in her 90s, and she wanted to simplify all the paperwork and get rid of everything in the house to make it really, really easy for her daughter to, you know, when she passed over, to like a clearing process, a death clearing process. And I remember like going through like all the jewelry and everything and saying, well, what do you want to happen to these, and who do you want it to go to? And she had grandchildren, and so what we did is made up little parcels and put notes in who they were for, and with a little note from her, you know, to say, you know, I love you, so that those were all ready. So it was easy for when she passed over, for them to go to who she wanted, and so everybody had a reminder of her.
There are
I
some
think
amazing
that's such a lovely
stories.
thing to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are some amazing stories around. A friend who was dying of cancer, she invited everybody around to her house to pick something that they wanted to take out of the house. And then she gave the instructions that everybody's to go and have a fish and chip supper together after the funeral, to a place where the owners of the fish and chip shop knew them, and you know, and those different ways of celebrating somebody's life when they've gone. Yeah, sorry, Caroline, what were you going to say?
Well, one thing that's so important, and Jane Duncan Rogers is brilliant at this, is that we make things as easy as possible for people when we've gone, the whole decluttering thing. But the will is so vitally important. My best friend died 6 years ago, and she and I were having a challenge where we updated our wills because she was divorced and her ex-husband was still her prime beneficiary. So we were writing our wills, and she died, and they never found the password for her laptop. So I knew, and I said to them, she is writing another will. She expressly said to me that she didn't want anything to go to his side. And the thing is that when somebody's divorced, if they die, their ex is considered to be deceased, but their ex's heirs will then inherit their share. So this man that she divorced, who you know, for very, very good reasons, had 2 sisters who made her life hell for many years. And those 2 sisters inherited 60% of her estate because her up-to-date will was not found. And that hurts me still. I can't, I'm still angry about that actually her ex-husband, you know, would have shared in that. But he allowed that to happen, knowing that her wishes would have been that his side of the family didn't inherit it, you know, that he didn't get anything and his sisters didn't get anything. They got 60% of a substantial estate. So we have to make sure that our affairs are in order. And Jane, her book, you know, Before I Go, is great, and her programs are great for helping us to do the practical stuff that we need to do. Because as I say, 6 years later, I'm still angry about that. I'm really unwilling to let that go. But it happened, and it devastated her family.
Mm. We're coming up to the end, but I'd like a little bit of a quick round of so crying, dressed in black, all of that stuff. Like, do you want people to cry? Do you want people to be dressed in black? Like, can you visualize your funeral? Where are you? What's it like? What's going on?
Well, for me, I think crying is a natural part of grief, and we can't say we don't want people to cry. You know, you naturally feel sad when somebody passes over, but at the same time, like when my ex-husband died, I felt really, really sad that he passed, but I also felt this joy for him because I knew that he was part of everything. So you can actually feel both emotions at the same time. And I think it's so important to allow ourselves and others to express our emotions freely and not try and damp them down, because otherwise they get trapped in the tissue in the body and manifest later on as illness. So I encourage people to, whatever emotion comes up, to let it flow.
I agree. I'd like to do a video while I'm still well and healthy, so that I'm kind of there. But mine, I would just like it to be really a celebration. And if it's emotional, it's emotional. But as I say, I'd quite like to, you know, we're off to see the wizard. I'd quite like people to just enjoy remembering the times that we've had together and all the different contexts of my life. But as you say, Deborah, you know, I think that tears and grieving are part of that, are a really important part of that. But I hope mine is one hell of a party. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Thank you, ladies. Wonderful conversation.
Oh, I definitely don't want the black either.
No, no.
I'd love a lot of colour.
Come in all colours,
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for watching this conversation. You can watch it again, you know, it'll stick around in the Silver Tent, and it'll also get posted up onto the Silver Tent TV YouTube channel. And if you haven't already subscribed, I suggest you do, because there's some wonderful conversations with a bit of a difference from us over 50 silver women with wisdom worth sharing. And yeah, I'd like to say thank you to Deborah and to Caroline, and also to Charlemagne, who didn't make it in, but thank you anyway. Okay, and
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you,
everybody.
Sunday, for putting this together and inviting
Yeah.
us to participate. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
very much. Thank you.